Gateway Talks, neither inside nor outside. Followers of the way, when I say that there is no Dharma outside, the students do not understand and deduce that it is necessary to search within themselves. Then they sit, leaning against the wall, tongue pressed to the upper palate, and remain so motionless. That they take for the Patriarch's gate of the Buddha Dharma. What a great error. So today's talk is on this passage from the Zen teachings of Rinzai, originally translated by Irmgard Schlegel, published back in the 70s. This is a collection, the record of Rinzai is a collection of sermons of Master Rinzai Gigan, known as Lin Chi in the Chinese, who was obviously a Chinese Zen master of the Tang dynasty. He was a pupil of Master Robaku, and although he lived only for a very short period of time and had a short teaching career, his is one of the two main schools that are still in existence today. And we've had a number of passages from Master Rinzai, and this is something a little bit different, perhaps to what we've looked at before. And important to remember that when it comes to Zen, if we remember going back to the sort of founding aphorism of Bodhidharma, who was the first Zen patriarch, who said, "The special transmission outside the teachings, not dependent on words and phrases, directly pointing to the human heart, seeing into its nature, and awakening." But those first two lines, a special transmission outside the teachings, not dependent on words and phrases, are not only dependent on words and phrases, but also not dependent on concepts either. And by concepts is not necessarily just the ideas that we have, that we think about things, i.e. in a purely intellectual way, but the term concept also refers to how we conceive of things. So that is literally how we, as it were, organize reality through the lens by which we see the world. These are the very deep inlaid biases, judgments, and so forth, and things that we take for granted. About how the world works, what I am, what the nature of reality is. And of course, one of the very deep concepts of reality is really this split, this duality that exists between I and other. Myself in here, also, that's an accreation, and then everything else which is out there. And this is something that seems so obvious to me that we don't even really reflect on it. We just take it for granted that that's actually how things are. But in this, if we look at that carefully, we can see that this I and other is the basic split. It's the as we know, the Buddha taught the middle way between the two extremes, and one of those extremes is I, and the other extreme is other. And as he taught the middle way, which was the way between or beyond, we could say, the extremes, then what he was pointing to was that the not only in the moral sense that we avoid the extremes, for example, of originally it was the extremes between luxury and severe privation, is that the spiritual practice goes in between those, avoids the extremes. This is the middle way. That's obviously a prescription, but also the middle way is a description of the nature of reality, that the nature of reality is in fact without a split in it at all, and that split is only apparent, it's an appearance, and is in fact a delusion. And of course the enlightenment, the Buddha's enlightenment, is to see reality, to see the nature of things as they really are, which means to see beyond that appearance, see beyond that delusion of that split. And in this passage we can see that Master Rinzai is in fact pointing to this split, because he says, followers of the way, when I say there is no Dharma outside, the students immediately create a notion or a concept that there is an inside, because that's the opposite of outside, isn't it? So Therefore, well, if the Dharma isn't outside, then it must be inside. And so as he says, they sit in zazen. This is what he means when he says that they sit leaning against the wall, tongue pressed to the upper palate, leaning against the wall with our straight back. We perhaps in the zendo or at home we don't sit with our backs against the wall. In good zazen we sit upright ourselves anyway, but it doesn't really matter. It refers to the to sitting in zazen, and actually it may in fact be referring to the fact not that their backs are against the wall so much, but that their backs are facing the wall. And this is because those of you who've been to, say, a Rinzai temple, and then those who've been to a Soto Zen temple will know that the monks in Rinzai face inward, so they have their backs to the wall and they face into the room, whereas the Soto monks they sit facing the wall, i.e. the other way round. So they've got their backs to the centre of the room and they sit facing the wall. So it may be, it's probably that Master Rinzai is referring to here. But anyway, the point is that they're sitting in zazen, and so they're literally goggle-eyed looking for something on the inside, because they've heard Master Rinzai say that the Dharma is not on the outside. So actually what he's saying, what he's implying, is that they're fools for looking in this way, because what they're looking for is a substance that's called the Dharma, isn't it? They're actually looking for a thing, a substance called the Dharma, and yet elsewhere Master Rinzai, makes it clear. He says that the Dharma, the true Dharma, has no shape or form. And not just Master Rinzai, but many Zen masters have said this as well. In fact, so did the Buddha. In the Diamond Sutra, he says, in a particular passage, he says, talking of the Buddha, but talking of the Buddha nature, if you look for me in form, if you search for me in sound, your footsteps go astray. You cannot find the Tathagata. Tathagata, of course, being another name for the Buddha. So the Buddha's also making this same critique that Master Rinzai is also saying. The mistake is that we're looking for something, whereas actually the true nature of the Dharma is shunyata, or emptiness. So that brings us really to say, well, what is the Dharma then? What do we mean when we use this term Dharma? And of course, Dharma has a number of connotations, two main ones really. The first is when we talk of the Buddha Dharma, then we're referring to the Buddha's teachings. The teachings that are written in the sutras, in the scriptures, in the Zen canon, etc. The substance of the Dharma talks, all those Buddhist formulations, and like 6 parameters and so forth. Teachings like shunyata and anatta and so forth. This is the Buddha Dharma. But again, in Zen and in Buddhism in general, and the Buddha taught 2 truths, as we know. He taught the relative truth, and the relative truth exists in the world of humankind, if you like. This is the world that we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, and we can cognize. We can talk about the Dharma, we can speak about the Dharma, we can read about the Dharma, we can write about it. But actually, this is known as the relative truth. But the relative truth is a pointing finger. And again, that one of those favourite Zen images that talks of the pointing finger pointing to the moon. But not to mistake the pointing finger for the moon itself. And this is exactly what Bodhidharma mirrors when he says special transmission outside the teachings, not dependent on words and phrases. And you see, when it came to the Zen coming west, that verse associated with Bodhidharma as encapsulating the essence of the Zen teaching was seized upon in a sort of wild iconoclasm that sought to say, right, we no longer have to bother with all these irksome Buddhist teachings, the 10 of this and the 72 different types of Dharma and the 84,000 different teachings. We don't have to learn all these things. How wonderful. We're free. We are free. You see, we just throw them into the fire. But in fact, this isn't what Bodhidharma was saying at all, because Bodhidharma was talking to his monks at his time, which would be 6th century China, and these monks were very intellectual. They knew their sutras. They'd learnt them all off by heart, and they recited them, and but they hadn't actually penetrated into them. And so, therefore, he was seeking to take that away. And, those last two lines, directly pointing to the human heart. That's that finger pointing again. But not mistake the finger. Seeing into its nature and awakening to that nature. In other words, your own realization is the most important thing, not how many sutras you can recite. But the sutras are important, because otherwise, why did the Buddha spend 45 years of his life teaching? The Buddha, in fact, in one place in the Pali Canon, the Buddha is teaching his monks in a forest, and he picks up a handful of leaves, and he says to the monks, poses them a question: "The leaves I hold in my hand, compared to the leaves overhead, are they many or few?" And the disciples all say they're few, Lord. The leaves on the trees are vastly outnumber those that you have in your hand. And the Buddha says, yes, it is so, yes, it is so. And so it is with what I have seen and what I teach. What I have seen is like the leaves overhead on the trees, a great, great many things. But what I teach are like the leaves I hold in my hand. And what I teach are those things that you need to know, to walk the path to the same realization. Beautiful analogy there. And so it is. This is why we can take it for granted that we can, it is safe to assume that if the Buddha taught it, it's because it's valuable for walking the path. So when it comes to this sort of, throwaway Zen type thing that you occasionally do run into, please be careful that just like the teachings themselves, they are medicines. And those medicines have to be applied to specific illnesses, a specific lopsidedness, specific one-sidedness that is thrown up because I get attached to one thing or another. Some people are very attached to, intellectual teachings, and I remember when I first joined the Zen group that I belonged to, back in the day, it was made very clear to us before we could join that we had to be schooled in, the basic Buddhist teachings, like the Four Noble Truths and Three Signs of Being and so forth. But after we had done that, when we joined the Zen class, we were told, don't read anything again, at least for a couple of years. And they sort of assumed, and quite rightly, the people who were taking these groups, that we'd all really, been reading everything that we could lay our hands on, as you do when you're very, right at the beginning, you're very enthusiastic and you want to look at everything. And nowadays, of course, you can go onto YouTube and podcasts, and there are countless podcasts that one can, go over and over and over again. And the Dharma may be perfectly sound and fine. But if it becomes a substitute for practice, for actually practicing in the body, then really it becomes just an intellectual exercise. And we have to be careful, because the Dharma is inspiring, and if we're feeling a little cast down, I remember I certainly used to do it. If I used to feel a little cast down, there were certain texts, even now I can read them and they inspire me, and that's great. But it's what we do with that inspiration. Do we just then take that inspiration and go out and get some more books and some more teachings and some more podcasts and some more YouTube videos? Or do we say, right, now let's really give myself wholeheartedly into what at this moment is being done, and then now it's time to sit zazen. So instead of finding an excuse, be wholehearted and sincere in following the practice assiduously and honestly and sincerely, with a hope of deepening our practice. Do we do that? Is that where we put that inspiration? If we do, then excellent, excellent. The teachings are doing the job that in fact they were designed to do. They are truly being a pointing finger, and the student is not mistaking the finger for the moon. He's now actually turning the head to look at the moon. So that's exactly what we want. So this is how the Buddha Dharma, which is the relative truth, points to the true Dharma, which is the other truth. In that teaching of the two truths, the absolute truth, and this is not something that we can just make up. This is something that we have to sit down and see clearly for ourselves. So that sitting or standing or walking or lying down, as the Buddha puts it, the four positions, in other words, everything that we do, because that includes the washing up, the opening and closing of the doors, the going shopping, the driving the car, the digging the garden, whatever it might be. All these things become Buddha things in the practice. And this is where the Dharma is actually discovered. And in that case, then, is the Dharma inside or is the Dharma outside? And we see that there are many stories, and many anecdotes from the Zen masters that show that just show this. And what they do is that they don't give a sort of, they have the method, if you like, is that whatever the student asserts, they just take it away. They don't say, oh, it's the other thing. No, it's the other thing. They just take it away. So, for example, you get stories from the Zen masters that appear to be contradictory. So, for example, we've had it before. The Master Mummon, the compiler of the Mummon-kan, the collection of koans, very famous collection of koans, Master Mummon, who was also a Chinese master, he said in one place, he says that the treasures of the house do not come in through the front gates, and we've had this before. Those treasures of the house are the heirlooms. He's talking about the Buddha nature. The Buddha nature, of course, is the real treasure. And this treasure, he said, doesn't come in through the front gate. In other words, it doesn't come from the outside in. It's already inborn. So, rather like the heirlooms of the house, if you live in the house that your parents lived in, and of course back in the day everybody did, because you didn't really move out to the new housing estates because you didn't have them. So you inherited your home. So the home you were born in already had the treasures of the house inside, and that was the analogy that Mummon was using. That those treasures of the house are inborn. When you're born, by the time you're born, the Dharma, the Buddha nature, is already inborn there. So there we go. No need to look outside. This is what his analogy is pointing to. If the treasures of the house did not come in through the front gate, then stop looking outside for it. Stop looking into the scriptures for it. Stop doing that more, getting more Dharma, going to more talks, etc. It's sort of thinking, oh, if only you could say it a little bit different, then I'd get it, then I'd become enlightened. No, the treasures of the house are already inborn. But then you get Master Hogan. And he came across two monks who were arguing about the nature of the mind, whether everything is in the mind, or whether things exist outside the mind. And this is at one time was a very important philosophical point in the teachings. And Master Hogan said to one of the monks, he said, he pointed to a stone. That was there, a boulder that was nearby, and he said, is that boulder inside your mind or outside your mind? Actually saying inside your heart or outside your heart. And the monk immediately replied, inside. And Master Hogan went, he said, your heart must be very heavy. So if you put those two things together, the first Master Mummon seems to be saying that the treasures are inside. And yet Master Hogan seems to be casting doubt on it being on the inside when the monk asserted it. So we actually see what's happening is that if you say outside, the master will take the outside away. And if you say it's inside, the master takes the inside away as well. So where is that boulder? Where is this voice? Where is this voice? And not only this voice, but the understanding. Because you can understand, if you're listening to this podcast or this video, you can obviously understand the words that I'm saying. So where is this understanding coming from? Where is it? Where does it arise, this understanding? Is it inside or is it outside? If you say it's inside, well, what if I don't say anything? Does understanding arise if I'm silent? What was I saying just then? You don't know, because if I'm not if I'm not speaking, no understanding will arise. So is the understanding arising inside or outside? And yet if you were dead and I was speaking, would there be understanding? Or if you were fast asleep, or if your ears were bunged up with wax, would there be understanding? So is this understanding inside or outside? We can usefully ponder these things and really look into them. Perhaps see a little bit why the masters were always so keen just to they take away that concept, they take away that notion, they take away that idea. Just when I think, out it comes, and the hand smacks it, and we have to let go, because it's in that letting go that then the heart can really open up, and we can see. It's a well-known, there was that well-known experiment. Some of you may have come across it. I've seen it before, and I better say it's a bit of a spoiler alert now. But there was an experiment where a group of people were told by a psychologist that they're going to watch a short film of two teams playing baseball, a red team and a blue team, and he told them that he wanted them to pay attention to how many times the people in the red team passed the ball. And then he showed them this film that lasts a couple of minutes, and he said how many, and they sort of said 6 or whatever, somebody said, oh no, there were 7, and all this sort of thing, and then the psychologist said to them, did any of you notice the man in the gorilla suit? And they all looked stunned, and about 3 people put their hands up in this group of 20. And he showed the film again, and sure enough, halfway through the film, a man walks onto the pitch in a gorilla suit, stands in the middle and goes like King Kong, like this, and then just walks off. And the majority of the class were absolutely gobsmacked. And they were convinced that they'd just seen another film and that this was a trick. But the 3 who did see it the first time said, no, that's the film we saw from the beginning. And what he was showing was that when our attention is focused on one thing, it's to the exclusion of everything else. And this is what the concepts do. So when the heart is in the grip of a concept, then it narrows. As useful as a concept can be. I mean, sometimes we need to screen out a lot of extraneous information in order to see what is necessary for a certain circumstance. But the mistake is that we then take it for the whole of reality. And of course it's not. Of course it's not. It's rather like, for example, and you can see this in sort of modern debate on TV and certainly on social media. You have a sort of partisanship, and if you have somebody who's on one side and they start talking about the people on the other side, the people on the other side suddenly become very caricatured, two-dimensional. They're mad, bad, and dangerous to know. They're bad faith actors and so forth. And if they do something wrong, then it's translated and interpreted in the worst possible light. But if somebody on one's own side does something wrong, then it's, oh, poor thing, he's not well, and he's under a lot of strain, and or whatever it might be, because we know deep down, or he had a bad upbringing, because deep down we still see them as a rounded human being. But the people on the other side are seen through a very different lens. They are nasty and wicked, and no excuse is enough to excuse what they have done. So this is just something that we come across every single day, where the concepts shape the reality, and this becomes the truth. And God help you if you should oppose my truth, or what I say is true, or say that there is another truth, because then there will be a reckoning. And my goodness, that's a harsh judgment. So this is it. It's being able to let go of those. Not that concepts do not have their part to play. They absolutely do. And we use them in Buddhism, as you know. We have concepts of right and wrong, and so forth. But also there is a seeing that goes beyond there. And that's the important thing to understand. So this is what the masters do. They take away the preferred lens, if you like, the way I like to look at things, including myself as well. And Master Mummon again makes this point very well in another saying of his. He said, "It all takes so long to become clear." He says, "But when one finally realizes that one is looking for fire with fire, or by using fire, then the meal gets cooked a lot more quickly." Let's just say that again. It takes a long time for it all to become clear, but when one realizes that one is looking for fire with fire, then the meal gets cooked a lot more quickly. And this is the thing. If I'm concentrated on the inside and outside, I mean, you could have this image really of somebody in a cave holding a torch, and he's been told to go in and find a fire. And so he goes in and he holds up the torch, which shines a light all over, and he's hunting round the whole cave, trying to round every corner, in every nook and cranny, looking to see if he can see this fire. But he needs the fire in order to see. And that's what he misses. That's what he misses. That's the mistaking the pointing finger for the moon as well. So nice little thing there. And this is important. So when it comes to the Dharma is functioning. How do we know the Dharma is functioning? Because I'm speaking, because you're hearing, because you're understanding these words. That's how we know that the Buddha nature is inborn. We go back to that pinch in the arm. Back to that pinch in the arm. Do I need to think to myself, I can see the pinch in the arm in order to feel it? Or does it just arise into consciousness, arise of itself in awareness? What is it that knows this pinching feeling? And it is when the heart is open and is really at that level, then what my late teacher Myokyo-ni used to call the informing information of the Buddha nature becomes apparent. And it's remarkable because it really doesn't need I on top of it. And that's not to say that, all that thinking is no good. Thinking is a wonderful tool. But again, as the old Japanese saying puts it, so is a hammer, but don't take it fishing. So perhaps we can ponder that a little bit. This neither outside nor inside. And instead just really look. Go into the looking. Just stay with that looking. Or with the listening when we go out for a walk. Just stay with that listening. And if a thought arises that says, what am I listening for? Then just let that go. Let that thought go. And just go back into that listening and into that looking. And in that, we experience the opening up of the heart. And this really then gives us a little taste of something. and the more familiar that we become with that, the more at home, then the energies of the heart begin to make that more the common and everyday habit. And suddenly we find that in that toing and froing, in that sitting, standing, walking and lying down, there is in that everyday that something becomes visible. Something that we are a part of and that we are inextricably linked with, and yet are within, and yet it's greater than I, but we are within it, and we are certainly a part of it as well. And difficult to say where one begins and one ends, and yet there are discrete beings as well, all at the same time. Okay, we'll leave it there for now.